Caleb Blackwood's childhood friend and I were in the same horrific car crash. When the paramedics rushed us to the hospital, he signed her surgical consent form first. He frantically instructed the doctors to prioritize Chloe's surgery, and then he waited anxiously outside her room for 5 agonizing hours. I was left alone in the hallway, bleeding internally. I had to sign my own life or death papers with my left hand. By the time he finally remembered me and asked a nurse where I was, the doctor looked at him and said, "Miss Sinclair has already been transferred to a private facility abroad." He was absolutely stunned. After the crash, the screech of tires and the shatter of glass were still ringing in my ears. Chloe Reed and I were both wheeled violently into the emergency room on parallel gurneys. Caleb, who had arrived at the scene mere minutes after the crash, grabbed the very first doctor he saw by the collar and aggressively signed the medical release papers for her. His voice trembled with sheer panic. "But not for me. Prioritize Chloe's surgery. She's been fragile since she was a child. She has a weak heart. She absolutely cannot wait." I lay on the other gurney, my vision blurring. Dark, hot blood dripping steadily from the back of my hand. I listened as a panicked young triage nurse shouted over the chaos, "Miss Sinclair, where is your family?" I forced my heavy eyelids open and looked toward the end of the bright, fluorescent hallway. Caleb stood there. His expensive custom suit jacket was stained with my blood, and his fingers were still trembling violently. But his eyes were completely glued to the swinging double doors that Chloe had just been wheeled through. He stared at those doors as if his entire universe, his heart, and his soul were trapped behind them. For me, there was only a young, frantic nurse desperately pressing down on my open wound with gauze, repeatedly screaming for a doctor. Her blood pressure is plummeting. Open fracture on the right tibia. Suspected massive internal bleeding in the abdomen. "Someone get Dr. Evans right now." The nurse then turned her panicked face to me, gently slapping my cheek to keep me awake. "Miss Sinclair, can you hear me? Stay with me. We desperately need you to sign the consent form for emergency surgery. Lucia, can you sign?" I tried to open my mouth, but my throat tasted overwhelmingly of hot copper and rust. I was too weak to even lift my head, let alone hold pen. "Caleb." I choked out a barely audible whisper. "Caleb Blackwood," the nurse yelled, reading my emergency contact file. He heard his name echo down the hall and glanced over. The nurse saw him and called out in absolute desperation, "Mr. Blackwood, she's crashing. She is not responding to us. We need your signature immediately to proceed with emergency, life-saving surgery." Caleb looked back at me. It was just a glance, a fleeting, irritated glance. His eyes swept over my pale, bleeding face, lingered for less than a second, and then returned fiercely to Chloe's ER door. "She's conscious, isn't she?" Caleb yelled back with a deep frown, completely dismissing the nurse's frantic urgency. "She can wait." I said, "Prioritize Chloe." When he shouted those words, the chaotic emergency hallway fell dead silent for a terrible, suspended moment. I saw the doctor's expression shift from urgency to pure shock. The young nurse completely froze, her blood-soaked hands stiffening on my open wound. Caleb and I had been married for 3 years. Everyone in our elite, high-society circle constantly whispered that he was an unfeeling, cold corporate machine, and that Mrs. Blackwood was incredibly, impossibly lucky to marry into such legendary old money. But only I knew the devastating truth. Caleb wasn't heartless. He wasn't cold at all. His heart just belonged entirely to Chloe Reed. If Chloe had a minor stomach ache, Caleb would mercilessly cancel a multi-million-dollar board meeting just to personally drive her to the clinic. If Chloe claimed she had insomnia, he would drive across the city in the middle of the night just to sit by her bed and bring her a glass of warm milk. If Chloe ever whispered to him, "Does Lucia not like me?" he would give me the silent, punishing cold shoulder for weeks until I finally broke down and apologized for a perceived slight. And now, as I lay literally dying in a pool of my own blood in front of him, he still chose Chloe. The young nurse was so incredibly frantic that her eyes turned red with tears of frustration. Mr. Blackwood, Miss Sinclair's condition is infinitely more critical. She is hemorrhaging. She needs surgery immediately. Caleb cut her off with a furious, impatient wave of his hand. I said, "Prioritize Chloe." From the crack in the ER door, Chloe's voice emerged. It was faint, perfectly weak, and sickeningly dramatic. "Caleb, don't worry about me. Go check on Lucia. She always did this." Her words were always painted with generous, sickly sweet martyrdom. But her psychological grip on my husband was tighter than an iron vice. Just as expected, Caleb immediately rushed to her door, bending down, his voice incredibly soft and panicked, as if coaxing a terrified toddler. "Don't talk, Chloe. Save your strength. The doctors are going to save you first. I'm right here." Lying on the gurney, feeling the coldness of death creeping up my legs, I suddenly let out a laugh, a dry, rattling, agonizing laugh that violently pulled at my abdominal wounds and made the edges of my vision go black. Dr. Evans, the lead trauma surgeon, sprinted over to my side, his tone steady but incredibly grim. "Miss Sinclair, are you physically able to sign these forms yourself? If we don't operate now, you're going to die." I looked up at him through half-open eyes. He held the surgical risk consent form directly in front of my face. The paper was so stark white it physically hurt my eyes. I couldn't lift my right arm, it was shattered. So, fighting through blinding waves of agony, I used my left hand to reach for the pen. The crying nurse tried to help steady my violently shaking hand, but I shook my head weakly. I could do it myself. As the tip of the pen touched the paper, drops of my own blood smeared across the bottom edge. I painfully scrawled the name, Lucia Sinclair. The letters were crooked, faint, and shaky. After the very last agonizing stroke, I handed the bloody pen back to Dr. Evans. "Doctor," I whispered, my voice barely a thread, "please save me." Dr. Evans looked down at me, a deep flicker of profound pity and anger in his eyes. "We will do absolutely everything we can, Miss Sinclair." I nodded, closing my eyes, as the nurses frantically pushed my gurney toward the operating room. Caleb finally glanced at me again. He seemed to have just remembered something, and his brow furrowed even deeper in irritation. "Lucia, do not throw a tantrum at a time like this," Caleb shouted after me. I had absolutely no energy to reply, nor did I want to. As the heavy operating room doors were about to swing closed, I heard Caleb say in a low, dismissive voice to his arriving corporate assistant, "She's always been overly understanding. She'll be fine. You go keep an eye on Chloe's situation." The word understanding stabbed violently into my bleeding heart like a blunt, rusty knife. I was understanding so I could be conveniently pushed aside. I was understanding so I could endure emotional abuse completely alone. I was understanding so my literal life could be placed second to Chloe's bruised ego. The moment the blinding, circular surgical lights turned on above me, I was suddenly vividly reminded of our extravagant wedding day 3 years ago. As Caleb was placing the multi-million-dollar diamond ring on my finger at the altar, he looked out into the pews and saw Chloe softly crying. He hesitated. His hand literally froze, and the ring almost didn't go onto my finger. After the lavish reception, he didn't accompany me back to our newly purchased mansion. He left me at the venue and went to console Chloe instead. That night, I sat alone in our massive, empty new house, still wearing my heavy wedding dress, until dawn broke. When Caleb finally returned the next morning, smelling of her perfume, all he said was, "Chloe is highly emotional right now. Don't hold it against her." It was always the exact same, exhausting line. "Don't hold it against her. Let her have her way. You're my wife, Lucia. You should be the bigger person." I closed my eyes as the anesthesiologist placed the mask over my face. Before the powerful drugs took full effect, I weakly raised my left hand and struggled to touch the massive diamond ring on my fourth finger. It was stuck at the swollen knuckle, and the dried blood made it incredibly hard to remove. The surgical nurse thought I was having a muscle spasm in pain and tried to hold my hand down. But I used the absolute last ounce of my fading strength to violently wrench the ring off my finger. The skin broke, and fresh beads of blood welled up. I dropped the heavy diamond ring onto the sterile metal tray next to the operating table. The sharp clink echoed in the quiet room. "Help me! Keep this," I whispered. The nurse looked down at the blood-stained diamond, her voice soft and careful. "Is this very important to you, Miss Sinclair?" I looked at the ring. 3 years of an abusive, isolating marriage. 3 years of limitless tolerance. 3 years of pathetic self-deception. In the end, it was just a heavy, cold metal band choking my finger. "Not anymore," I said. Just before the anesthesia pulled me entirely under, I heard frantic footsteps outside the doors. Someone shouted down the hall, "Miss Reed's vital signs are perfectly stable, preparing for standard observation." Then Caleb's voice echoed, thick with overwhelming, desperate relief. "Thank God. As long as Chloe is okay." I plunged entirely into the freezing darkness, and at that exact final moment before unconsciousness, I finally truly admitted it to myself. It wasn't that Caleb Blackwood didn't have the time to love me. It was that he had simply, absolutely never put me first. When I finally woke up, my throat felt like it had been violently scraped with industrial sandpaper. The VIP hospital room was completely empty. No Caleb, no Blackwood family members. Just a harsh, cold white light and the rhythmic, lonely beeping of life support machines. I tried to shift my right leg, and a tearing, blinding pain shot violently through it. My abdomen was tightly wrapped in thick, heavy gauze, and every single shallow breath felt like my lungs were being repeatedly stabbed with hot needles. A nurse noticed my monitor spike, realized I was awake, and immediately called for Dr. Evans. He walked in, flipped through my thick medical chart, and glanced down at me with a grave expression. "Miss Sinclair, your emergency surgery was successful. You survived. However, the road to recovery will be incredibly long. Your right leg was shattered and will require second, complex reconstructive surgery. And we need to aggressively monitor the abdominal wound for high infection risk." My voice was a dry, broken rasp. "And, Chloe." Dr. Evans paused. His jaw tightened in what looked like suppressed disgust. "A mild, grade 1 concussion and some superficial arm abrasions. She has already been moved to a comfortable, regular suite." I closed my eyes. Of course, the person Caleb had aggressively demanded be prioritized for life-saving surgery was infinitely less injured than the woman bleeding out in the hallway. "Has Caleb been here?" I asked, staring at the ceiling. The nurse's face grew incredibly awkward. She looked at the floor. Dr. Evans, however, didn't try to hide the brutal truth. "No, Miss Sinclair. He has been sitting by Miss Reed's bedside the entire time." The hospital room fell dead silent. I didn't cry. Perhaps the massive surgery had drained all the tears from my body. Or maybe the final, fraying string inside my soul had finally, cleanly snapped. I just stared blankly at the acoustic ceiling tiles and said softly, "My phone, please." The nurse carefully handed it to me from an evidence bag. The screen was half shattered from the crash, but thankfully it still powered on. Not a single missed call. 0 text messages from Caleb, whose name was pinned to the very top of my messages app. My mother-in-law, however, had left several angry voicemails. I pressed play on the first one. "Lucia, that poor girl Chloe was absolutely terrified by the crash. As her sister-in-law, you should immediately go see her and apologize when you wake up. Do not make things difficult for Caleb right now." The second voicemail: "Don't you dare throw a jealous fit just because Caleb signed Chloe's papers first. You know how medically fragile she's been since she was a child. Stop being so dramatic." The third, a Blackwood wife needs to be composed, silent, and dignified. If you truly love my son, do not cause him any more unnecessary trouble at a highly stressful time like this. I listened to them all. Then I calmly placed the phone face down on the sterile white blanket. So, me nearly dying in a pool of my own blood was just causing trouble for Caleb. The young nurse's eyes welled up with sympathetic tears. "Miss Sinclair, you really need to rest." I nodded slowly. I picked up the shattered phone again and dialed a Swiss international number I hadn't called in a very long time. It rang exactly 3 times before someone answered. "Lucia." The moment I heard Era's sharp, elegant voice, my nose tingled. Era was my late mother's absolute best friend before she passed away. She later moved to Switzerland and ran an ultra-elite, world-renowned medical rehabilitation clinic. Before I got married, she had fiercely urged me to go abroad to Europe for a prestigious master's program in art therapy. I had foolishly refused, completely sacrificing my future for Caleb's sake. "Marriage also needs to be carefully managed, Era," I had told her then. Era had been silent for a long time on that phone call before replying. "Lucia, just make sure you don't manage yourself into absolutely nothing." Now, her prophetic words had come devastatingly true. Clutching the phone, I said softly, "Era, I want to come to you for treatment as soon as physically possible." There were exactly 2 seconds of stunned silence on the other end of the line. Then, without a single question, without an ounce of judgment or blame, she replied with pure, decisive action. "Send me your medical charts right now. I will arrange absolutely everything." I handed the phone to the nurse and asked her to take clear pictures of my chart's cover page and the surgical notes. Dr. Evans looked at me, deeply concerned. "Miss Sinclair, are you absolutely sure about transferring? You literally just had major, life-saving abdominal surgery. There are immense medical risks involved with a transatlantic flight, and I'm almost certain we will need a legal signature from your next of kin to release you." I smiled, a cold, dead empty smile. "I will sign for myself, doctor." Dr. Evans's expression became complicated. "Mr. Blackwood is your legal husband." "Legally, I have to." I cut him off, my voice dropping to a glacial chill. "He refused to sign for my surgery when I was dying in the hallway. He absolutely does not need to sign for my transfer now." The room fell completely silent again. Dr. Evans looked at me, sighed heavily, and didn't press the issue any further. He brought me the AMA against medical advice and transfer risk waivers. My left hand was heavily hooked up to N4 drip, and I couldn't lift my right arm at all. So I had to inch my broken body over agonizingly slowly. The crying nurse held the clipboard incredibly steady as I signed Lucia Sinclair for the 2nd time that day. The first time I signed my name, it was to survive. The 2nd time, it was to escape. That exact afternoon, the elite medical extraction team Era arrived at the hospital. They were a private, international medevac unit, fully accredited, ruthless, and incredibly efficient. They aggressively communicated with Dr. Evans, confirmed the life support transport equipment, and contacted the private hospital in Zurich. I remained fully conscious and utterly cooperative the entire time. As a nurse helped me pack my few belongings, she pulled a clear plastic evidence bag from a drawer. Inside was my massive, blood-stained diamond wedding ring. "Miss Sinclair, this?" I glanced at the multi-million-dollar diamond, then looked away. "Put it in my bag." She asked carefully, "Aren't you going to wear it?" "No," she said, absolutely nothing more. At dusk, a set of hurried, heavy footsteps echoed from the quiet hospital hallway. For a fraction of a second, I thought it was Caleb. But when the door finally opened, it was his corporate assistant, Arthur. Arthur took one look at the heavy transport equipment surrounding my bed and was visibly, profoundly stunned. "Mrs. Blackwood, what is happening here?" "Call me Miss Sinclair," I corrected him sharply. Arthur became even more flustered, sweating under his collar. "Mr. Blackwood is Well, he is still with Miss Reed. He asked me to quickly come over and see if you were awake yet. I looked at him, my eyes dead. He sent you. Arthur lowered his head in deep shame. Miss Reed said she was feeling slightly dizzy just now. Mr. Blackwood felt he couldn't get away. I laughed, and the violent movement sent a searing, blinding pain tearing through my fresh abdominal wound, causing cold sweat to immediately bead on my forehead. Arthur panicked, stepping forward. Miss Sinclair, please don't misunderstand the situation. Mr. Blackwood is incredibly worried about you. Worried enough that he waited until nightfall to send his secretary. I asked, raising an eyebrow. Arthur couldn't answer. He just stared at his shoes. I picked up my shattered phone and quickly backed up my mother-in-law's vile voicemails, the hospital triage timestamps, and the photos of the signed consent forms directly to a secure iCloud drive. Then I looked at Arthur. Please tell Caleb Blackwood that I am entirely done waiting, and give him this. I took the bloody wedding ring out of my bag, placed it inside a cheap, empty plastic pillbox, and held it out to the assistant. Arthur's face went completely pale. He backed away. Miss Sinclair, this is inappropriate. I can't take that. There is absolutely nothing inappropriate about it, I said, leaning back exhausted against the pillows. Since he definitively chose to stay by Chloe Reed's side today, he no longer needs to carry the burden of my marriage with him. Arthur didn't dare reach out to take the box. I slammed the pillbox onto the bedside table. If you don't take it to him, Arthur, I will have the cleaning staff throw it into the biohazard incinerator. Trembling, Arthur had no choice but to pick up the plastic box. As the elite medical team wheeled my gurney out of the room and down the hall, Chloe's pathetic, crying voice drifted clearly from a VIP suite down the corridor. Caleb, did I make Lucia angry? You should really go check on her. I feel so guilty. Caleb's low, incredibly soothing voice immediately followed. She won't be truly angry, Chloe. You know how understanding she is. You are the most important thing to me right now. Just rest. Lying flat on the transport bed, I saw him through the half-open door of her suite. His broad back was to me. It was the exact same back I had seen walking away from our wedding altar, walking away at the car crash, and walking away in the emergency room. Always turned away from me. I closed my eyes and turned my head away. As the gurney rolled past the main nurse's station, Dr. Evans stepped out and handed me a thick, securely sealed manila envelope. These are the certified copies of your medical records, surgical notes, and the exact ER triage times. You might need them for legal purposes later. I took the envelope, clutching it to my chest. Thank you, doctor. He leaned in and lowered his voice, his eyes full of fierce respect. Miss Sinclair, live well. I nodded. As the heavy elevator doors slid closed, I took one absolute last look at the emergency floor. It held my spilled blood, my horrific surgery, my discarded wedding ring, and the very last, dying embers of my hope. The elevator descended. My phone vibrated in my hand. A text from Caleb. Finally, just one single line. You're awake. Get up and go see Chloe. She hasn't stopped crying because of you. I stared at the arrogant, cruel text message. I calmly turned off the screen, and I permanently blocked his number. Caleb Blackwood finally remembered that he had a wife at exactly 9 p.m. By that time, I was already strapped into a private medevac jet, soaring 30,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean, leaving the nightmare of my marriage far behind in the dark. Arthur, Caleb's terrified assistant, told me what happened later that evening. After Chloe had finally exhausted her theatrical tears and fallen into a peaceful, medicated sleep in her VIP suite, Caleb quietly stepped out into the hallway. He loosened his expensive silk tie, exhaling a long breath as if he had just successfully completed a monumental, world-saving task. He casually turned to Arthur, his voice carrying the mild, irritating annoyance of a man forced to deal with a misbehaving child. How is Lucia doing? Has she stopped throwing her little fit? Arthur's face was deathly grim. He looked at his boss, his hands trembling. Sir, your wife, she is still incredibly angry. Caleb frowned deeply, rubbing his temples. She is being so completely unreasonable. Chloe just went through a massive psychological trauma. As my wife, Lucia should be significantly more understanding at a highly stressful time like this. Where is she? Arthur reached into his suit pocket and slowly, hesitantly pulled out the cheap, clear plastic pillbox. Your wife asked me to give this to you, sir. Caleb took the cheap plastic container. When he popped the lid open and saw the massive, blood-stained diamond wedding ring resting inside, his handsome face instantly darkened into a mask of pure, insulted fury. What the hell is this supposed to mean? Caleb snapped, his voice echoing in the quiet corridor. Arthur didn't dare speak. He simply stared at his polished shoes. Furious, assuming I was playing a dramatic, manipulative game to win his attention, Caleb shoved the ring into his pocket and strode aggressively down the hall toward the surgical recovery ward. He pushed the heavy door to my assigned room wide open, ready to deliver a stern lecture on marital duties. He stopped dead in his tracks. The room was completely empty. The bed sheets had been stripped and changed. The life support machines were gone. The room smelled faintly of bleach. On the sterile bedside table sat only a half-finished glass of lukewarm water. He stood in the doorway as if he had just been violently slapped across the face. Where is she? A passing floor nurse looked up from her charting tablet. Miss Sinclair has been transferred. Transferred where? Caleb demanded, stepping into the hallway. I am incredibly sorry, sir. Due to strict HIPAA regulations and explicit patient privacy requests, we absolutely cannot disclose that information. Caleb's voice turned to ice. I am her legal husband. Tell me where she is. Dr. Evans happened to be walking out of his surgical office at that exact moment. He overheard the aggressive exchange and paused, glancing at Caleb with eyes full of absolute, undisguised contempt. Mr. Blackwood, Dr. Evans said loudly, his voice cutting through the corridor. So, now you suddenly remember that you are her husband? Caleb's face tightened defensively. What exactly do you mean by that, doctor? Dr. Evans closed the medical file in his hands with a sharp snap. He walked up to Caleb, standing toe-to-toe with the billionaire. When Miss Sinclair was in critical, life-threatening condition and unable to sign for herself, you looked my nurses in the eye and told them to leave her bleeding in the hallway to prioritize Miss Reed, Dr. Evans stated coldly. When Miss Sinclair finally woke up alone for major surgery and desperately needed her family by her side, you were still sitting in Miss Reed's room holding her hand. When Miss Sinclair was agonizingly processing her own international medical transfer, your assistant showed up, but you didn't. Every single sentence was like a splash of freezing, toxic water violently hitting Caleb's face. He physically stepped back, swallowing hard, desperately suppressing his mounting panic. I didn't know, Caleb stammered, his arrogant facade cracking. I didn't know she was that seriously injured. Dr. Evans's gaze grew even colder, practically freezing the air between them. My triage nurse informed you explicitly. She told you Miss Sinclair had massive internal abdominal hemorrhaging, an open, shattered fracture on her right leg, and critically unstable vital signs. Your exact response was that she was still conscious and to save Miss Reed first. Caleb opened his mouth, but absolutely no words came out. Mr. Blackwood, Dr. Evans added, delivering the final fatal blow. Miss Reed was a minor injury observation case. She had a bruise. Miss Sinclair was a catastrophic emergency surgery case. My medical staff explicitly explained this mathematical difference to you when you forced them to take Chloe's forms. You made your choice. Caleb's fingers slowly, agonizingly curled into fists. He seemed to finally, truly remember the events of the afternoon. He remembered the dark, thick blood pooling in the ER hallway. The young nurse screaming his name in desperation. The way I had looked at him from the gurney, my eyes begging for my life. But it was far, far too late. He pulled out his phone and frantically dialed my number. The first time, no answer. The second time, no answer. The third time, it went straight to an automated mechanical message. The number you're trying to reach is currently unavailable. He started aggressively typing text messages. Lucia, where did you go? Stop this ridiculous game and come back to the hospital immediately. I know you're upset about today, but Chloe's situation was highly specific. She was having a panic attack. Just answer the damn phone. I didn't reply to a single one. By the time he sent the fourth text, I was already soaring high over the dark Atlantic Ocean. Era, my mother's dear friend, was sitting beside my stretcher, gently tucking a heated blanket around my shivering body. She saw my shattered phone screen lighting up repeatedly on the tray table. She reached over, her face set in grim lines, and completely powered the device off. Don't look at it, Lucia, Era said softly, smoothing my hair. He probably just found out I actually left, I whispered, my voice incredibly raspy from the intubation tube. Era looked down at me, her beautiful eyes filled with a terrifying mixture of profound pity and absolute, homicidal anger. Lucia, you almost died today. He found out far, far too late. I said nothing. I just closed my eyes. As the private jet hit a patch of turbulence, a dull, blinding pain throbbed violently through my shattered leg and sliced across my abdomen. I bit my lower lip so hard it bled to keep from screaming out in agony. Era immediately grabbed my hand, squeezing it tightly. If it hurts, Lucia, say so. Let me give you the morphine. I shook my head weakly against the pillow. No, it's better if it hurts, Sarah. It helps me remember. The reality of the empty house that night, Caleb practically tore the hospital apart. He aggressively tried to check private transfer flight records and was denied by security. He tried to financially pressure the hospital administrator into releasing my files, but Dr. Evans physically blocked him, citing strict federal HIPAA regulations and threatening to call the police. Finally, utterly defeated, Caleb stood at the main nurse's station, his voice dropping into a low, tight, desperate whisper. Just tell me, where did she go? Dr. Evans looked at him and gave him a single, devastating sentence. Miss Lucia Sinclair has been transferred to a private medical facility abroad. Caleb completely froze on the spot. Arthur told me that in that exact moment, the billionaire's face went deathly, sickeningly white, as if the oxygen had been vacuumed from his lungs. He finally truly understood. I hadn't just gone to a luxury hotel to pout. I wasn't sulking at a friend's house. I wasn't sitting by my phone, waiting for him to buy me an expensive designer purse and coax me back into submission. I was gone. Completely, legally, physically gone. When Caleb slowly dragged himself back to Chloe's VIP room, she had just woken up. She leaned delicately against the plush pillows, her face pale, her voice softly trembling. Caleb? How is Lucia? Is she still horribly mad at me? Caleb didn't rush to the bedside to comfort her as he usually did. He didn't stroke her hair. He just stood motionless at the foot of the bed and stared at her. The doctor said, "You only had very minor injuries, Chloe." Chloe's eyes flickered with a sudden, microscopic panic. I was just so incredibly scared, Caleb. My head was so dizzy. You know how frail I am. You told me your chest hurt. You told me you couldn't breathe, Caleb said, his voice terrifyingly empty. Was that true? Her eyes instantly reddened with dramatic, well-practiced tears. Caleb, are you blaming me for this? I didn't want Lucia to misunderstand. Maybe I should get out of bed right now and go apologize to her. Caleb closed his eyes, pinching the bridge of his nose. She's gone. Chloe froze, her performance dropping for a fraction of a second. Gone? Gone to where? Abroad. They transferred her out of the country. The room fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. Chloe quickly lowered her head, fresh, pathetic tears falling onto her blanket. It's all my fault. If it weren't for my panic attack, Lucia wouldn't be so terribly angry with you. In the past 3 years, her fragile, self-blaming tears would have softened Caleb instantly. He would have rushed to assure her that she was perfect and that I was just being overly sensitive. But this time, he just stared blankly out the hospital window into the dark city. "She's not angry," he said slowly, the horrific realization finally setting in. "She gave me her wedding ring back." Chloe's fingers violently clenched the corner of the white sheet. I learned much later that Caleb didn't sleep a single minute that night. He went down to the hospital parking garage, locked himself inside his dark SUV, and sat there until the sun came up, obsessively scrolling back through our text message history. The further back in time he scrolled, the more completely silent he became in the dark car. For the past 6 months, our conversations were almost entirely, humiliatingly one-sided. From me, "Caleb, I left your mom's follow-up cardiology report on the desk in your study. I've prepared all the donor gifts for the charity gala at the estate next week." From me, "Chloe texted me and said she's not feeling well again. I went ahead and made a specialist appointment for her. The insurance information is in the left drawer." From me, "Will you be back in time for our anniversary dinner tonight?" His replies to my endless, exhausting labor were brutally sparse. "Got it. You handle it. Don't overthink things. Take care of Chloe for me." Sitting in the freezing car, he was finally realizing that our relationship hadn't suddenly, violently turned cold because of the crash. It was that I had been the absolute only one tending the fire for so long, bleeding myself dry to keep it burning, that I had finally, permanently burned out. The next morning, my mother-in-law heard through the country club grapevine that I had been medevaced abroad, and she called Caleb immediately, her voice shrill with indignation. "Caleb, what is the meaning of this? Running off to Europe right after a car accident. Does she want to make the Blackwood family a laughingstock at the club?" Caleb's voice was hoarse and exhausted. "Mom, she was seriously injured. She almost died. Even if she was injured, she can't just throw basic decorum out the window," his mother snapped. "Chloe is still in the hospital suffering. As her sister-in-law, Lucia doesn't even bother to visit her room, and instead, she takes off her multi-million-dollar wedding ring to threaten you. That is incredibly manipulative." Caleb was silent for a long time. His mother continued her venomous rant. "Caleb, you absolutely cannot spoil women like this. Do not go running after her to Europe. She has no powerful family to back her up. She has no money of her own. She will come crawling back to our doorstep on her own in a few days when her bank accounts dry up." Caleb used to implicitly believe that exact narrative. He had always arrogantly thought I had absolutely no way out. My parents had passed away long ago, leaving me no massive inheritance, and I was incredibly distant from my extended family. After marrying him, I had dedicated everything to making the Blackwood family my own. He was mathematically certain I would never possess the strength to leave his wealth. But he didn't know the ultimate psychological truth. After a person is forced to sign their own surgical consent form on the absolute brink of death while their husband holds another woman's hand, they no longer need anyone else as their escape route. They become their own savior. 3 days later, Caleb received a certified email. The sender was from Thatcher and Associates, an incredibly ruthless, high-end family law firm based in Manhattan. The subject line was terrifyingly clear: regarding the dissolution of marriage and division of assets for Miss Lucia Sinclair and Mr. Caleb Blackwood. Caleb stared at the glowing computer screen for a full minute without blinking, completely paralyzed. Then he shot up from his office desk and frantically dialed my number. Still unavailable. He called the lawyer's office instead. Leo Thatcher answered the phone. His voice was incredibly polite, clinical, and completely devoid of warmth. "Mr. Blackwood," Leo said smoothly, "Miss Sinclair's current Severe physical condition makes direct, emotional communication with you highly inadvisable. Please direct all further matters and negotiations strictly through my firm. Caleb gritted his teeth, his grip on the phone white-knuckled. Did she explicitly tell you to send this garbage? Is she seriously demanding a divorce? Where the hell is she? Leo paused for a perfectly calculated, agonizing second. Mr. Blackwood, you already violently forfeited your one opportunity to know her medical condition at the hospital. You no longer possess the legal or moral right to inquire about her location. The call ended with a sharp click. Caleb, clutching his dead phone, felt a true, suffocating, utterly complete panic for the very first time in his privileged life. The price of willingness during my first agonizing week at the elite rehabilitation center in the snow-capped mountains of Switzerland. The physical pain was so profound it kept me from sleeping. My shattered right leg was bolted into a heavy titanium brace, and I couldn't risk pulling the massive 20-stitch wound on my abdomen. Even a nurse gently helping me sit up in bed to drink water would leave my hospital gown completely drenched in freezing, shivering sweat. Era had hired the absolute best, most ruthless physical therapist in Europe for me. During my very first leg training session, the pain of bearing weight was so blindingly intense that my vision actually went black, and I nearly bit completely through my lower lip. The therapist stopped, looking at the blood on my mouth. Miss Sinclair, do you want to pause? I looked out the massive glass window at the towering, untouchable, snow-capped Swiss Alps. Continue, I breathed. At that point, lying in a bed of agony, I wasn't even thinking about Caleb anymore. It wasn't that the psychological heartache was completely gone. It was that the sheer physical pain was so incredibly specific, so all-consuming, that it completely overshadowed the pathetic ache in my heart. Every single day when I woke up, I had my temperature meticulously taken, my bloody dressings changed, my vitals checked, 2 hours of agonizing physical therapy, forced meals, and exhausted sleep. Every single task, every breath was about staying alive. Caleb Blackwood belonged to an old, decaying world, the world that had willingly left me to die outside an operating room. On the 7th day, Leo sent me the preliminary divorce agreement he had aggressively drafted. Leo Thatcher was my former college classmate. He was now a notoriously ruthless, bloodthirsty family law attorney in New York. He had attended my lavish wedding 3 years ago. At the reception, he had watched Caleb leave mid-speech to go find a crying Chloe. Leo had pulled me aside and said only one prophetic thing. Lucia, the absolute most dangerous thing in a marriage is when one person is aggressively pretending to be asleep. I didn't fully understand the weight of his words then. I understood them perfectly now. The legal agreement sent to my tablet was beautifully, terrifyingly clear. I was formally requesting an absolute dissolution of the marriage. Premarital assets would rightfully remain separate, but marital assets would be divided ruthlessly according to strict state law. And then came the financial reckoning. During the 3 years of our marriage, Caleb had repeatedly, secretly used our joint family account to pay for Chloe Reed's private medical bills, her luxury apartment housing, high-end designer jewelry, and incredibly expensive European travel. The itemized list totaled an astronomical $542,000. This entire amount needed to be legally returned to the marital assets before division. Furthermore, for the Blackwood estate, I had personally advanced my own funds to pay for 3 years of high society events, massive charity banquets, and my in-laws' exorbitant private medical concierge arrangements. I had been their unpaid, bleeding ATM. The total came to $184,000, which needed to be explicitly reimbursed with the proof of receipts I had securely backed up to the cloud. Leo emailed me and asked if I wanted to leave some room for negotiation, just to speed up the process. I looked at the screen, my abdominal scar burning, and replied with one word, no. I used to be incredibly embarrassed to talk about money, foolishly thinking it would hurt our romantic feelings as a couple. But I later learned the hardest lesson of all. The one who refuses to count the costs is almost always treated like an open, endless checkbook. My time, my emotional energy, and my money were totally taken for granted. Chloe took my endless concessions for granted. Caleb took for granted that I would never mind being placed second. So now I would aggressively legally count every single miserable penny. The day the thick, heavy divorce papers arrived via courier at the sprawling Blackwood estate, my in-laws were enjoying afternoon high tea. According to Leo's private investigator, when the FedEx courier delivered the massive package, my mother-in-law excitedly thought it was a lavish apology gift from me, perhaps imported chocolates or an expensive scarf to beg for her forgiveness. She sliced open the package right in front of several gossiping Blackwood relatives. When she pulled out the thick legal binding and saw the bold words divorce agreement and financial demand, her smug face changed instantly into a mask of pure, humiliated rage. Absurd. She slammed the heavy papers onto the glass coffee table, shattering a teacup. Chloe was there, too. After being discharged from a hospital with her minor scratches, she hadn't returned to her own expensive penthouse. She had immediately moved into the Blackwood estate, ostensibly because Annie was so incredibly worried about her being alone and traumatized. Chloe was lounging on the sofa, wearing a pristine white, knit designer dress. On her wrist was a breathtaking vintage, heirloom diamond bracelet. It was the exact same bracelet I had personally spent weeks tracking down and bidding on at an auction last year as a birthday gift for my mother-in-law. My mother-in-law had told me that diamonds brought good healing energy to her frail health, and that she was letting Chloe borrow it for a while to heal from the crash. Back then, I had just smiled a tight, pathetic smile. Now, sitting in Switzerland, I realized it wasn't generosity. It was me, time and time again, completely surrendering my own boundaries and my own dignity to appease parasites. My mother-in-law held the legal agreement, her voice turning shrill and violently angry. She actually dares to ask for money. She has lived in this prestigious family for 3 years, eating our gourmet food, living in our multi-million-dollar house. And now, after one little dramatic hospital incident, she wants a cut of our fortune. A wealthy aunt chimed in, sipping her tea. These young women today are so incredibly ambitious and greedy. Caleb is such a massive catch, and she's still not satisfied. She probably saw Chloe come back to the estate and got deeply, pathetically insecure. Chloe touched her diamond bracelet and said softly, performing her role perfectly, "Auntie, please don't be upset. Lucia is probably just in a lot of physical pain right now and not thinking straight. She's lashing out." My mother-in-law sneered, her face ugly with malice. "She's in pain? Chloe, weren't you in the exact same accident? Why aren't you making a massive, dramatic scene like her?" Chloe carefully lowered her eyes, looking meek and submissive. Lucia is Caleb's legal wife, after all. It's completely understandable that she wants more of his attention right now. It sounded like a perfectly reasonable, empathetic statement, but in reality, every single word was a highly calculated reminder to my in-laws that I was just a jealous, bitter woman aggressively competing for affection. As expected, my mother-in-law grew even angrier, taking the bait completely. If she truly understood her duties as a high society wife, she would know exactly when to step aside and be quiet. "You and Caleb grew up together, Chloe. What is she? Just some girl he married." When Caleb finally arrived at the estate from the office, the living room was in absolute chaos. He picked up the thick legal agreement from the coffee table, and his face grew darker and darker as he aggressively flipped through the pages. His mother was still shouting, pacing the Persian rug. "Call her right now, Caleb. Tell her to get on a plane, get back here, and apologize to this entire family. A divorce. Demanding our money. Who the hell does she think she is?" Caleb didn't respond immediately. When he finally flipped to the financial settlement exhibits at the back of the packet, his fingers completely froze. The list was excruciatingly, humiliatingly detailed. Date, October 14th, Endoscopy procedure for Chloe Reed. $2,300. Paid directly from the joint marital checking account. Date December 2nd. Birthday gift of Cartier jewelry for Chloe Reed. $18,000, explicitly noted in his ledger as a family gift. Date March 15th. European ski trip for Chloe Reed. First-class tickets and five-star hotels totaling $46,000. Paid from Caleb's post-nuptial investment account. There were even the massive advance payments for his parents' upgraded VIP suite at their exclusive wellness retreat in Aspen, totaling nearly $200,000. Every single item had a highlighted reference number matching a legally binding receipt. Caleb slowly looked up from the papers. The blood had entirely left his face. "Mom," Caleb whispered, his voice trembling. "Lucia paid for these." His mother's eyes instantly darted away, suddenly defensive. "Well, she is a Blackwood daughter-in-law. What is wrong with her spending some of her allowance to show proper financial respect to her elders? Why didn't I know about this?" Caleb demanded, his voice rising in horror. "I thought you were paying for the Aspen retreat out of the family trust. You're always so busy with your corporate work. I didn't want to bother you with such trivial, domestic financial matters," his mother snapped, crossing her arms defensively. "Besides, she was perfectly willing to pay for it." Willing. I had been willing. I had been willing to flawlessly fulfill Caleb's exhausting family duties. I had been willing to bleed myself dry to please his arrogant parents. I had been willing to trade my own hard-earned money and precious time for a pathetic, fleeting sense of belonging in their family. But willingness is absolutely not a legal license to be drained entirely dry. Caleb's phone suddenly rang in his pocket. It was Leo Thatcher. He answered it and slowly put it on speakerphone, placing it on the coffee table. Leo's voice was steady, cold, and immensely professional. "Mr. Blackwood, I assume the legal agreement has been successfully delivered. Miss Sinclair expects a formal, written response within exactly 7 days." Caleb suppressed his boiling anger, gripping the edge of the table. "I want to speak with her directly, Leo. Put her on the phone." "Miss Sinclair explicitly refused that request," Leo countered smoothly. "I am her husband." Caleb roared, completely losing his temper. "Currently, yes. That is a biological and legal fact," Leo replied, entirely unfazed. "But that certainly does not prevent her from retaining hostile legal counsel to recoup stolen funds." His mother lunged forward, screaming at the phone. "You tell Lucia Sinclair that if she wants a divorce, she can pack her bags and leave with absolutely nothing. The Blackwood family won't give her a single, miserable cent." Leo paused for a perfectly timed, dramatic second. "Mrs. Blackwood," Leo said, his voice dropping to a terrifying chill. "Miss Sinclair is not asking for a single penny that does not already legally belong to her under state marital law. On the contrary, if the Blackwood family refuses to quietly settle the specific funds she personally, generously advanced for your lifestyle, we will aggressively proceed with highly public, humiliating civil litigation." His mother trembled with absolute, blinding rage. "Are you threatening me, you little shyster?" "It's not a threat, ma'am," Leo said softly. "It's a legal notification. Good day." The call ended with a sharp click. The massive, opulent living room was terrifyingly quiet. Chloe stood up, her eyes brilliantly red with fake, trembling tears. "Caleb, maybe I should fly to Europe and explain things to Lucia." Chloe whimpered softly. "I genuinely didn't know that money was stolen from your joint account. I can pay it back to her slowly, over time." His mother immediately grew fiercely protective, throwing an arm around Chloe. "Pay back what? You are not well, Chloe. You were in a horrific car crash. It is only right for Caleb to financially take care of you. You are basically family." But Caleb just looked at Chloe. His eyes were dark, searching her face for the very first time. "Chloe," Caleb asked, his voice dead, Did you honestly not know where that $50,000 for your European ski trip came from? Chloe's face went completely, sickeningly pale. I, I thought it was your personal bonus money, Caleb. Caleb didn't ask any more questions. He saw the microscopic twitch of her eye, the hesitation. He violently clenched the thick divorce agreement in his fist, turned on his heel, and walked out of the estate without saying another word. That exact night, he sent me a massive, sprawling, 1,000-word email. It was the absolute first time since the horrific accident that he had written me more than a single sentence. He desperately wrote that he honestly didn't know I was so seriously injured. He wrote that he completely panicked at the hospital that day and lost his mind. He wrote that Chloe had been terribly frail since childhood, and he was just subconsciously used to taking care of her first. He begged me to understand that his mother's vile words didn't represent his true feelings. At the very end of the massive wall of text, he wrote, "Lucia, divorce is not a small matter. We have 3 years of history. When you are feeling physically better, please, let's talk in person. I will fly anywhere." I read the pathetic, excuse-laden email from my bed in Switzerland. I replied with exactly 4 words. Proceed with the agreement. After hitting send, I shut down my MacBook and slowly stood up to continue my grueling physical therapy. The Swiss therapist firmly helped me stand. My shattered right leg was trembling violently under my own weight. Every single step felt like walking barefoot on shattered glass and hot knives. But I gritted my teeth, closed my eyes, and took 1 step. Then another, and another. The massive glass window behind me reflected my face. I was pale, gaunt, and visibly scarred, but my eyes were brilliantly, beautifully clear. I suddenly understood the metaphor perfectly. Leaving Caleb Blackwood was exactly like physical therapy. It was going to hurt like hell. I was going to fall down. Old, agonizing wounds would be torn open again and again. But as long as I absolutely refused to stop walking, I would eventually be able to stand entirely on my own 2 feet again. The unveiling of the truth Caleb's second, massive wave of absolute panic hit him the following week, when Leo formally sent him the official hospital triage report. It was part of the certified copies of my medical records Dr. Evans had handed me on my way out. It stated in bold, undeniable black and white, "Patient, Lucia Sinclair. Triage level 1 critical. Blunt abdominal trauma. Suspected massive internal hemorrhage. Open, compound fracture of the right lower limb. Immediate, life-saving surgery required. Patient, Chloe Reed. Triage level 3 minor. Mild concussion. Soft tissue, contusion of the left upper limb. Vitals perfectly stable. Observation recommended. Discharge pending." The exact timestamps of the horrific day were clearly, legally noted as well. I was admitted to the chaotic ER exactly 3 minutes before Chloe. The first time a desperate nurse frantically called for a family signature to save my life was at 2:47 p.m. The time Caleb aggressively signed Chloe's minor observation consent form was 2:51 p.m. The time I painfully, bloodily signed my own surgical consent form was 2:56 p.m. 5 minutes. 5 minutes was more than enough time to see a marriage for what it truly, utterly was. Leo expertly compiled this devastating timeline into a formal legal notice and sent it directly to Caleb's corporate office. After receiving the undeniable mathematical proof of his betrayal, Caleb lost his mind. He called my blocked number 17 times in a row. When he couldn't reach me, he drove like a madman back to the hospital to confront Dr. Evans again. The doctor was calmly doing his afternoon rounds, and Caleb aggressively intercepted him in the busy hallway. "Is there a mistake in these medical records?" Caleb demanded, shoving the papers at the surgeon. Dr. Evans stopped, looked at the papers, and then looked at Caleb with utter disdain. "Mr. Blackwood, which specific part of reality are you desperately hoping is a mistake?" Caleb's face was grim, sweating. Chloe looked incredibly serious at the time. "Miss Reed, kept violently crying that she was dizzy and had severe chest pain. You didn't see her. The medical tests showed absolutely zero indicators that required priority surgery, Dr. Evans said flatly. But she's had a dangerously weak heart since she was a child. Caleb argued, clinging to his narrative. Dr. Evans calmly opened his iPad and pulled up the test results. We comprehensively checked her heart, Mr. Blackwood. There were absolutely no acute cardiac issues. Her heart is perfectly healthy. She was having a mild panic attack. Caleb was completely, utterly stunned. Chloe has been frail since childhood. That single, manipulative sentence had been her golden, get-out-of-jail-free card for a decade. For years, she had weaponized that exact phrase to steal so much. Caleb's constant companionship, the Blackwood family's overwhelming favoritism, and my own repeated, exhausting concessions. But cold, hard medical reports don't play along with manipulative acting. They only state empirical facts. Caleb took the report, his hand shaking, and drove straight back to the Blackwood estate to find Chloe. She was lounging in the sunlit solarium, sipping expensive artisan tea from a delicate porcelain cup, reading a magazine. When she saw him storm in, she hastily put down the cup and dramatically pulled her cashmere shawl tighter around her shoulders, coughing slightly. "Caleb, what are you doing here?" she smiled weakly. "Isn't it busy at the office today?" Caleb didn't say a word. He walked over and slammed the medical report onto the glass table directly in front of her. "On the day of the crash, when my wife was bleeding out in the hallway, why did you scream that you couldn't breathe?" Chloe froze. The color drained from her face. I was just really incredibly scared, Caleb. It was a car crash." "The doctor said you have absolutely zero heart issues," Caleb said, his voice dangerously low. Her eyes immediately reddened with giant, dramatic tears. So now you think I was faking it? You think I wanted to hurt Lucia?" Caleb said absolutely nothing. He just stared at her. Chloe's tears fell quickly, her voice pitching into a hysterical whine. "I know Lucia maliciously blames me, but I didn't want the accident to happen either. Caleb, you were never like this before. You never used to doubt my health because of someone else." Someone else. She had just called me someone else. I, Caleb Blackwood's legal, devoted wife of 3 years, was just an inconvenient outsider in his mistress's words. Caleb looked at her and suddenly felt like he was staring at a complete, horrifying stranger. The illusion was shattering, but he still didn't completely break ties. More than a decade of shared history and intense psychological manipulation wasn't an easy lie to break. His care for Chloe had become a deeply ingrained, toxic habit. The most terrifying thing about toxic habits is that they make you mistake grooming for responsibility. And Chloe understood this psychological weakness all too well. She sobbed completely uncontrollably, collapsing onto the sofa. Soon enough, drawn by the noise, his parents rushed into the solarium. "Caleb, are you violently pressuring Chloe again?" his mother shrieked, rushing to hug the crying girl. "She just got out of the hospital. Have you completely lost your mind?" Caleb wearily pinched the bridge of his nose, feeling a massive headache forming. "Mom, Lucia was injured infinitely more seriously than her. She almost died." His mother scoffed loudly, waving a dismissive hand. "So what? Isn't she recovering just fine in some luxury spa in Europe right now? Chloe is here in the States all alone. If you don't take care of her, who on earth will? She has no parents." "Her parents are perfectly alive, Mom. They just live in Florida. You know that." "Lucia doesn't have parents at all," Caleb argued. At that stark reminder, his mother fell silent for a fraction of a second. Then she frowned, doubling down on her delusion. "Why are you comparing them? Lucia married into our rich family. She should happily put the Blackwoods first." For the very first time in his life, Caleb didn't argue with his mother. He just stared at the three of them. He suddenly remembered the day before the horrific crash. I had called him from the kitchen. It was the 10th anniversary of my mother's tragic death, and I had quietly asked if he could go to the cemetery with me to lay flowers. He had sighed heavily over the phone and said, "Lucia, Chloe's not in a good place mentally today. She's anxious. I have to take her to a specialist. You just go by yourself." I had been silent for a long time on the phone before just saying, "Okay." He hadn't heard the profound, earth-shattering disappointment in my voice then. Or maybe he had, and he just genuinely didn't care enough to address it. Thinking back now, Caleb realized with horror that my okays had become significantly shorter and lighter over the last year. It was the sound of someone slowly, meticulously extracting themselves from a dead relationship. He had just been too arrogant to notice until it was far, far too late. Meanwhile, realizing she was losing her grip, Chloe began her vicious, public counterattack. She didn't badmouth me directly to the press. She was far too calculating for that. She just posted a highly curated, pathetic photo from her hospital bed on her Instagram, showing a small bruise on her arm and in foredrip. The dramatic caption read, "It's only after a horrific accident that you realize some relationships simply can't withstand a tiny misunderstanding. I pray that Lucia gets well soon, and I pray she stops fighting with Caleb because of her jealousy over me. Healing requires forgiveness." Broken heart in just a few carefully crafted sentences, she successfully painted herself as the innocent, angelic victim, and me as the bitter, jealous, hysterical wife trying to tear a family apart. The comments from their elite social circle quickly flooded in. "You're way too kind, Chloe. The wife is being so ridiculously petty. You guys have been childhood friends for so long. What is there to even be jealous about? She's crazy. I heard she just ran off to Europe to pout. Isn't that just emotionally forcing her husband to cave?" Someone sent me a screenshot of the post. It was from a loose acquaintance in the country club socialite circle. She asked tentatively, "Lucia, what's really going on with you and Caleb? Everyone at the club is saying you were so insanely jealous that you didn't even visit Chloe's room after the crash." I looked at the toxic comments without a single ounce of anger. I was beyond anger. I simply had Leo securely save the screenshots of Chloe's post to our legal drive. Leo called me. "Should we respond with a legal cease and desist? Aren't you worried about this false narrative spinning completely out of control?" I looked at the grueling physical therapy schedule printed on my desk. "No," I said calmly. "The more she posts online, the more admissible evidence she leaves behind for the civil suit." That evening, I finally posted something on my own, highly private social media. No long paragraphs, no dramatic complaints, no accusations, just a single high-resolution photo. It showed the heavy titanium brace bolted onto my shattered right leg. It showed the thick, bloody gauze wrapped tightly around my abdomen. And resting on my lap was the official medical chart, clearly showing Level 1 trauma. Critical condition. Caleb was not in the frame. Chloe was not in the frame. Within exactly 10 minutes, Chloe's comment section went completely, deadly quiet. The high society people who had just been viciously gossiping about me started frantically sending me private messages. "Lucia, my God, you were injured this badly?" I thought they said Chloe was the one in life-threatening danger. Where was Caleb? Caleb wasn't with you. I didn't reply to a single one of them. I just put my phone on Do Not Disturb and continued my agonizing leg exercises. The next day, Chloe's manipulative post was hastily deleted. But it was far too late. Leo had already legally saved all the screenshots, comments, and share records. Caleb saw my graphic post, too. He stared at the horrific photo of my shattered body for a long, long time in his dark office. Arthur stood quietly beside him, not daring to breathe. Caleb suddenly asked, his voice shaking, "Arthur, how long is the wound on her stomach?" Arthur swallowed hard, speaking softly. "The Swiss doctor's report said over 20 staples on the abdomen, sir, and her leg might require a thorough reconstructive surgery later this year to walk properly." the color completely drained from Caleb's face. She didn't tell me. Arthur couldn't help himself. The disgust finally leaked out. Sir, when your wife woke up from her first surgery, you texted her to get out of bed and go see Miss Reed. The office was deathly silent. Caleb looked up at him, his eyes wide with horror. Arthur immediately lowered his head. I'm sorry, sir. That was out of line. Caleb didn't get angry at the insubordination. He just leaned back heavily in his leather executive chair, looking as if he had been physically struck by a truck. After a long, agonizing moment, he whispered to the empty room, My God, what have I done? No one answered him. The answer was entirely too clear. When the woman who loved him needed him most, he had left her to die alone in front of a surgical risk form. The final severance Caleb and I shared our GPS locations on the Find My app. He had asked me to turn it on during our very first year of marriage. I just worry about you being out alone in the city at night, he had said so sweetly. I had foolishly believed him. Later, I realized his worry was highly selective. He would check my location to see when I was coming home to cook, but he wouldn't answer my calls. He knew I was at the family estate working late, setting up his mother's charity auction, but he would have the corporate driver take him home first so he could sleep. He knew I was waiting for him outside a restaurant in the pouring rain, but he would text, Chloe is scared of the thunderstorm. I have to stay with her. I'm not coming home tonight. 10 days after the crash, sitting in my Swiss hospital bed, I opened my iPhone settings and turned off location sharing. A notification popped up. Stop sharing location with Caleb Blackwood? I firmly tapped confirm. At the exact same time, it was the middle of the night in the States. Caleb was sitting alone in his dark study, reviewing corporate documents, when his phone buzzed violently with a system alert. Lucia Sinclair has stopped sharing her location with you. He stared at the glowing words for a long time, completely motionless. Arthur told me later that night Caleb made countless, frantic calls. He called tech support. He called highly paid private investigators. He even aggressively called the bank, demanding to know if my location could be traced through my credit card transactions. It was then he discovered that the American Express Platinum card I used during our marriage had been completely deactivated by me 3 days prior. He had absolutely zero access to my personal offshore bank accounts. He had zero authority over my own finances. It was then he truly, finally realized that I was never actually dependent on the Blackwood family's wealth. It was just that, before, I had been blindly willing to leave the door open for him. Now, I had permanently boarded it shut, standing before the floor-to-ceiling windows of his dark office. Staring out at the city, he texted me, Lucia, please turn your location back on. I am terrified. I didn't reply. He sent another. I'm just so worried about you. I need to know you are safe. Still no reply. Half an hour later, a third, desperate message came through. Please don't punish me like this. When I saw that message, I was holding on to the parallel metal rails in the gym, practicing walking. The physical therapist was counting the rhythm beside me. 1, 2, 3. I moved slowly, each step sending a sharp, clear, agonizing pain up my spine. My phone lit up on the bench. I read the message. I deleted the conversation. Punishment. Caleb still arrogantly thought my departure revolved entirely around his feelings, that I turned off my location specifically to punish him, that I wanted a dramatic divorce just to make him regret it, that I went to Europe so he would chase after me like a romantic movie. He didn't understand the fundamental truth. I just didn't want him anymore. Besides the GPS location, I systematically, ruthlessly canceled all logistical arrangements related to me at the Blackwood estate. The expensive monthly appointments at his parents' Aspen wellness retreat, I had made them. I canceled them. The review of the estate staff's massive payroll, I had done it for free. I stopped doing it. The elaborate holiday gift list for the extended Blackwood family members, I had compiled it. I deleted it. Even Chloe's expensive private doctor's appointments were once arranged and paid for by me. These were the crucial Trivial domestic matters Caleb never bothered his brilliant mind with. His arrogant parents certainly didn't see my efforts as actual labor. They would just casually say, "Lucia, you're sitting at home anyway. Just handle it for us." I used to foolishly think it was just handling it to be a good wife. It wasn't until I was lying in a hospital bed, bleeding to death, that I realized those small tasks had slowly, maliciously trapped me, turning me into the Blackwood family's unpaid, disrespected estate manager. I emailed the Aspen retreat and permanently canceled my personal payment authorization for all future services. I messaged the estate manager and stated clearly that from now on, all massive expenses must be confirmed and paid by my in-laws directly. I sent a formal legal notice to Chloe's private clinic to permanently stop all charges to my member account. An hour later, my in-laws were blowing up my phone with furious calls. I didn't answer. They switched to frantic voice messages. "Lucia, what is the meaning of this? The retreat manager says this month's fees haven't been paid. My card declined. Do you want me to be a laughingstock? The staff at the estate are aggressively asking me for payroll documents. I don't know anything about this. Fix it." Chloe went for her follow-up today, and the clinic said her member account is completely frozen. Are you going to be petty about medical bills too? Call me back immediately. I smiled, selected all the voicemails, and forwarded them directly to Leo. He replied with a single word, "Good." That evening, my highly indignant in-laws received a certified letter from his Manhattan firm. It aggressively reminded them that I was under absolutely no legal obligation to continue funding their private luxury retreat, the estate's massive social expenses, or Chloe Reed's medical accounts. It also explicitly stated that any further verbal harassment would result in an immediate restraining order and a lawsuit for harassment. Furious, my mother-in-law stormed into Caleb's office at Blackwood Incorporated. She bypassed a secretary and slammed the lawyer's letter directly onto his desk. "Look at the wonderful, vindictive wife you married," she screamed. "She's actively trying to kill me with stress. She cut off my spa." Caleb's face was incredibly grim after he read the legal threat. "Mom, she shouldn't have been financially responsible for these things in the first place." His mother was incredulous, her jaw dropping. "You're taking her side now." "I'm just stating a mathematical fact. She paid for everything," Caleb said, rubbing his eyes. "The fact is she married into the wealthy Blackwood family. She enjoyed the Blackwood fortune, and she should silently bear the Blackwood responsibility," his mother yelled. Caleb looked up at her, his eyes dead. "What fortune did she enjoy, Mom?" His mother was completely stumped. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. For 3 years, I hadn't thrown a single lavish birthday party for myself. I hadn't demanded expensive diamond jewelry from Caleb. Even our honeymoon to Paris was canceled because Chloe had a sudden stomach bug and was hospitalized, and Caleb had to stay back to hold her hand. I lived in the massive Blackwood mansion, yes, but I was treated more like a live-in manager than a wife. Caleb had given me a supplementary credit card, but its absolute biggest expenses were his parents' retreat fees and the family's endless social obligations. My mother-in-law, flustered and angry at being caught in her delusion, shot back defensively. "Now you're blaming me. Weren't you the one who spoiled her by letting her handle the money? If you hadn't married her in the first place, none of this embarrassing drama would have happened. Chloe is so much more considerate and sweet than her." Caleb fell into a dark, heavy silence. His mother seized the opportunity to regain control. "Next week is your grandmother's 80th birthday gala at the country club. All the important relatives and business partners will be there. You are going to have Lucia make a video appearance from Europe. She will publicly apologize to Chloe for this drama, and will let this whole messy thing go." "Apologize?" Caleb frowned deeply. "She almost died, Mom. She won't agree to that." His mother sneered, waving a hand. "She made such an ugly, public scene running away. She has to give the Blackwood family a way to save face in front of our friends. You tell her. If she doesn't show up on screen and apologize, she won't get a single dime from the divorce settlement. When this ridiculous message reached me via Leo, I had just finished my grueling physical therapy. Leo asked over the phone, "Should I draft a refusal letter?" I wiped the cold sweat from my forehead with a towel. No. Leo was taken aback, his lawyer instincts flaring. "Wait, you're actually going to participate in their charade." "I am," I said, looking out at the half-melted snow outside my Swiss window. "The Blackwood family wants a grand stage to save their public face. I'll gladly give them one." Leo quickly understood my tone. "What legal materials do you need me to prepare for the presentation?" I opened the backup files on my encrypted phone. The bloody surgical consent forms, the ER triage records, my mother-in-law's venomous voicemails, Chloe's manipulative social media screenshots, the marital financial statements, and a subpoenaed video file of the hospital's hallway surveillance footage from the day of the horrific accident. I hadn't planned on using these nuclear options so soon. But since the Blackwood family was in such a desperate hurry to put me on a public stage to humiliate me, I would make absolutely certain that every single person in that ballroom saw exactly who really deserved to be begging for forgiveness on their knees. The day before the gala, Caleb called me. This time I actually answered. He was silent for a long, agonizing time. "Lucia." I said nothing. His voice was hoarse, broken. "Please, don't take my mother's vile words to heart. You don't have to appear at the gala tomorrow." I told them no. "Why not?" I asked coolly. "Because you're not well yet." "I'm not well. You finally noticed." The other end went dead silent. I continued, my voice sharp and clear. "Caleb, I will be attending the gala via video. You want me to apologize to Chloe? Fine. And it just so happens I have a few important things to say to your family, too." He immediately grew tense, panic bleeding into his voice. "Lucia, what are you going to do?" I laughed softly. "Didn't you always say I was incredibly understanding?" I looked at the perfectly organized evidence, files glowing on my computer screen. "Tomorrow night, Caleb," I whispered, "I am going to be understanding one absolute final time.